believe that we must transform the institutional components of higher ed that currently limit access to knowledge and to credentials for a significant majority of learners for whom the cost and elaborate process of admission and retention is out of reach. Both of these experiences and the challenges, both of these experiences inform and challenge me and each other. As I prepare for this talk, I spent a lot of time listening to Professor Irani. I never had the chance to meet Professor Irani, but I spent a lot of time listening, reading, and trying to understand his life. I know he's touched the lives of so many. So I'm trying to understand in my small way, preparing for this lecture as much as I can. And his influence already has given more meaning to these experiences in my life as well. So I'm going to try to weave that in as we go along. I am not a scholar of Zoroastrianism or of the Gathas. I'm not a scholar of philosophy or even a student of the domains of belief, the canon of Professor Irani's scholarship. I am very simple in my understanding of the words of Zarathustra and the core concepts of Asha, Bohuman, and Ushta. But as Professor Irani's teaching and scholarship challenges each of us to think, to learn, and to grow through the highest levels of philosophy and belief that he has made accessible to all. The fundamental point is to apply these broad understandings as human beings in our day-to-day lives. So today, following my remarks this afternoon, we will convene a panel of 3 remarkable leaders making an impact on the world by walking the path of Asha. Aisha Gadiali, Kayhan Irani, and Freya Shroff. I'm grateful to each of them for the lives that they lead and their generosity of time and goodwill to join this panel. So I want to start with some reflections. We just saw a wonderful overview by Khurshid about Dr. Irani's many contributions. But in preparing for this talk, I've heard many people reflect about their life with Professor Irani, what he meant to the community. And let me just share some of those reflections. We always called him Professor Irani. He was sage-like. We had respect for him like Einstein. He was like my grandfather. We would talk about music and art. He was sincere, he was earnest, he was kind, and he was esteemed by everyone. He was down to earth. He was a mediator. He was the foundation of Zagni. Sublime wisdom, a cornerstone of the community.
I put my earphones, okay?
A great sense of humor. He liked the title, quote, Gatha cult leader, unquote. And I was told it was meant to be sarcastic, so he embraced it. This is a quote from someone reflecting on many years ago. It said, we were at a Parsi pre-wedding ceremony where Auntie Peruja and Uncle Kaikhosrow were present as well. My son was 7 months old. We all said polite hellos, and I was in such awe to be in his presence that I don't remember saying very much. What I do remember is the next day, this professor, an icon of knowledge and stature, came up to us and reached into his inner pocket and presented my son with a bright orange finger toy. He said he had gone for a walk, he saw it in the store window, and he thought of the little guy. Needless to say, I was speechless. And I have one more quote from one of our panel members. He embodied community despite being a fancy, super smart, well-respected person. And the other part is that his teachings, including the examples from his life and stories that he offered me, illuminated the practice of Humata, Kupta, and Vivareshta. and the practice of walking the path of Asha as one engaging with the messiness of life, the contradictions, and about not being perfect or seeking some idea of perfection, or by offering advice from on high. This last reflection stood out for me. In the fourth part of a video series, The Domains of Belief, you probably have all seen these, there's 4 parts to them. It was recorded in 2012 at the California Zoroastrian Center. Shahriari interviews Professor Irani about the application of his thesis, The Domains of Belief, to our day-to-day life, how the domains of science, of ethics, technology, and religion apply to our day-to-day lives. I'd like to read an excerpt from that interview, a quote by Professor Irani. Quote, "We are looking at the world, not through clear-cut glass, but through pieces of glass, through which we have different foci, different pictures, which cause a certain kind of discomfort. But the moment we understand what the situation is, we can be rendered comfortable. And I think philosophical insight ultimately will do that. We are capable of understanding the world. When, how, to what extent? I don't know. It presents grave difficulties to us in science, in ethics. Can we construct a society in which all the significant values will be maximized? I hope so, but I don't know. Do we have the intelligence to do it? And once we have some grasp, should we have the will to do it? I don't know." Unquote. Well, in a world today where we are looking through different pieces of glass that cause great discomfort, for example, a pandemic that is interpreted through scientific evidence for some, through conspiracy for some, through politics, through social justice, through health and the experience of our families, and more. Are we as individuals and communities capable of understanding, reconciling the different lenses, maximizing the important values? Do we have the intelligence to do so? Can we, as individuals and as communities, accomplish this? That is the question. This quote by him just really resonated at this time. The challenge before all of us. It's a challenge for individuals and it's a challenge for communities. And this thread of the individual and the community is really where I have plugged into his work. It's really resonated with me. So I'm going to start with an individual journey. I'm going to share with you a little bit about my journey of community, faith, and individual responsibility. It's a very personal journey, but I did share it at the World Congress, so I guess it's out there. But I'd like to share it with you all. I promised Brambles that I would share it as well. So I was born in Moline, Illinois. I was raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in a Lutheran church, and then in a small town in Michigan called Olivet, in a congregational church, where we would regularly ring the church bell after track meets and basketball victories, and also to call people to church on Sunday morning. My life with the church was family. My wonderful parents, Martha and Richard Payway, who I think are watching on Zoom today, and my brothers and sisters as well. It was Sunday school, very much like today when everybody comes. First communion, my dad getting out his metal pocket comb and combing my brother's hair and slicking it down before they went in after the ride in the station wagon. Potlucks, talent shows, choir practices, meals brought by church members for my whole family when my mom was in the hospital. and hymns in these big, thick red books with extensive numbering in the hundreds of names like Amazing Grace, A Mighty Fortress, and A Balm in Gilead. It was community. It was family, hope, joy, support, and sometimes sadness. In high school and in college, while I continued to attend church from time to time, getting less frequent as I got older, my community shifted to a cross-country team and to track teams. I ran through college, 5 a.m. workouts, 3 to 6 p.m. workouts, racing every single weekend. That became my life. But I also had an intellectual journey while I was in college. Yes, I did study while I was in college. My intellectual journey was about studying communities, how communities make decisions, how governments decide, how governments are structured, the histories, the policies, the practices of countries and cultures, rising and falling, acting together, and sometimes disintegrating into war, building institutions and uneven distributions of wealth, and tearing them down. How we build communities, how we govern them, how we progress, and how we fall. The question that stood out for me as a college student in all of this historic and modern day exploration was, what do we as individuals control or shape in our lives and in our communities? And what do cultures and institutions control or shape? What can we as individuals control, and what are we controlled by? Where can we exercise our influence, our choices? I met my husband, Zarir, who's here with me today, at Michigan State University. He was a doctoral student in economics from Shiraz, Iran. Really cute, too, I should say. And a housemate in a rental house my first year of graduate school. In a return effort on my part to try to train and race following a very severe injury that put me out of the mix for 1984, he was the one, the only one, who told me, you know what? I want to really get serious about graduate school and stop messing around with this running. It didn't go over very well. I was planning to train for the Olympics and, it didn't go over very well. But he told me, I thought, he's got guts to tell me that. That's pretty good. But he was also the one that I said to a year later, of a year of friendship, when he returned to East Lansing, Michigan for dinner one night. And I said, we're pretty good together. I think we ought to get married. And he said, yeah, I agree. And 37 years later, here we are. That decision, though, was more than just a life commitment. It was the beginning of a journey to a new faith for a man who was raised in a Muslim household and a woman raised in a Lutheran household. In our rapid decision to marry, that we were soulmates, we didn't take time to discuss religion and the faith of any children we may have as well. But we started that daunting journey together by exploring Zoroastrianism. We wrote to the Iranian Council of Moguls and received cassette tape recordings. Do you remember those? Cassettes. We received cassette tape recordings of prayers, and we received books about a Seder Pushi ceremony. And we connected with Mr. Kaikhosrow Movid and his wife Parveen Movid, who lived in Chicago. And when we moved to Madison, Wisconsin, we made trips to Chicago to visit and participate in activities at the Dari Mer there. In addition to the deep connection to Iranian heritage that we both wanted for our children one day, the emphasis on individual choice and responsibility, the consciousness of our actions, the pursuit of the good mind as foundational to building good in the world. Individual thought and actions could lead to a collective balance. That really resonated for me. When we moved to Washington, D.C. in 2003 with our two young daughters, Gordia and Yasna, After living in St. Louis, in Madison, Detroit, and Philadelphia, we were connected with Mr. Timsah Shahriari and the Zambi community. We were not sure how we'd be received by the community, but the community received us warmly. Our first event was Sports Day, and there you go, the Avesta class was meeting, and we jumped right in. Eventually, I began teaching Avesta class with a good friend, Farzad Adu, and eventually helped to coordinate the classes, and then organized Nowruz events and the interfaith community concerts and rehearsals, and coat drives that our good friend Stefan Pistakia got us into as well. He has good ideas, he puts you to work, that's for sure. And eventually I ran for the Board of Trustees and served as president for 4 years, during which time we ran a capital campaign for our prayer room, which was completed this past year by the current board, where my husband currently is president. So our daughters had their Cedric Bushi in 2007. I had mine in 2009. My husband had his in 2011. Mr. Kaikhosrow from Chicago performing ceremonies for all of us. And while I celebrated with my family and members of our community, it was a day for me on my Cedric Bushi of individual choice, of recognizing my responsibility in helping to, quote, understand what the situation is so that we can be, quote, rendered comfortable in our work, unquote. So that's my story. That's why I'm a Zoroastrian. But let me shift now a little bit to talk about education. I'm going to start with a story of eyes wide open. In 2nd grade, I put on a pair of glasses, not unlike these, for the very first time. They were big, thick lenses. They had those safety arms around the back that curled around the back so they wouldn't fall off, although mine regularly fell off with tether balls and other things. The world went from fuzzy to clear, from blurring and squinting to sharp and eyes wide open. I recall saying to my dear mother, who was standing in front of me when I put them on, "Mom, I didn't realize you were so wide." She said, "I'm so glad you can see." Okay. I went from trying to memorize the text in a book to actually reading the text of books. I went from imagining the words on the chalkboard to actually speaking and writing the words on the board. Glasses were a new, empowering lens for me on the world. And I think it is a metaphor for education for all of us. We all know that education is vital to our civilization and to our democracy. Education opens the mind. It exposes us to new ideas. It gives us tools to access knowledge and to build new knowledge and to make discoveries. Education from K to 12 and beyond is the way individuals change their stars and the way communities grow and prosper. Last week, during a visit at the universities of Shady Grove, which is the campus where I'm based, it's a unique campus that has 9 different university partners who offer 81 degree programs aimed at workforce development and the priorities of our county. We hosted the ambassador of El Salvador and her staff to discuss access to education for the thousands of El Salvadoran students who are in Montgomery County, and the priority of the government, of the El Salvadoran government, for every student in El Salvador to have access to education and the tools for learning. One member of the team there noted that when one student gets an education, it changes everything, not only for that student, but for everyone in that student's home as well. It's not unlike when a nursing student at the universities of Shady Grove earns her credentials or his credentials and the ability to serve and to heal. But for many of these first generation students at Shady Grove, they are entering the middle class. It is a job. it is healthcare, it is transportation, and more. In my life as an educator, as a researcher, and now as an administrator, the blend of the effort, of the individual effort, and the institution come together. Education empowers people, but education must be available and accessible to everyone. As Professor Irani noted, quote, "We are capable of understanding the world," unquote. But I would add, we must have the resources that prepare us for this journey. Education is not only technical and substantive knowledge to do a job, to discover a cure, to build and apply an algorithm, or to build a bridge. It is the ability to discern, to consider and gather more knowledge, to embody a belief in religion, as well as a commitment to science, to see the common humanity in different views of community or morality, to grasp the meaning of a value or principle, and to apply it in our daily decision-making, to see each other, as Professor Irani would say, as human beings and not as the other. It is the key to seeing a bigger picture or to understand so that we can be, quote, rendered more comfortable. Access to education is social justice. It is a resource that we cannot afford to limit by excluding learners because of the cost, complex systems, or by setting up barriers that cannot be crossed without years of prior privilege. While every individual has a responsibility to develop their good mind, every community has the responsibility to provide the resources and support needed for the journey. Again, in an interview about, that was titled, Zoroastrian Religion, Philosophy, and History, this was again in 2012, Professor Irani said, and I'm quoting again, "Truth really means the totality of vision of ideal existence. It doesn't mean, in our ordinary sense, the truth or falsity of a statement. The truth that he is talking about is the relationship of all things in perfect harmony so that nothing occurs at the expense of something else. There is no friction in that existence. This ideal world of Zarathustra, Asha, was then actualized in the material world. Ahura Mazda conceived of a perfect existence in purely ideal terms. And this is what is called Asha, the truth. So truth, then, means an ideal form of existence where nothing is in conflict or in abrasion to anything else. It is also the notion of social justice. No one prospers at the cost of somebody's injury. We understand that this is a continuous journey and a lifelong commitment to lean into and work toward a more harmonious, abrasion-free existence, where no one prospers at the cost of somebody's injury. And we understand that we flow across the domains of belief, sometimes drawing upon the need for justifying our existence in order to explain, or drawing on religion when we might better draw upon the world of science. But we must also understand that we need the intelligence, the education for a journey as well to continue to work toward Asha. Thank you all so much for listening. Now I'd like to invite Kayhan Irani up, and we have two guests joining us on the screen. Is that right? Will we be able to see them? Together? Yes. These glasses, I just got glasses. Only lens on the world. I should still be able to see that.
So give me a second. We're gonna try and get them, get our two panelists.
Oh, okay.
On this one.
Oh, that's even better. Put
Wait a
it,
minute, that's what it says, but I don't know how you would do it.
you can put it in the oven.
No, I don't think you can. I think that's a different model. I think they just are giving crap.
Spotlight our virtual panelists. So give us a minute.
You have to wash it and precondition it with olive.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's it. Right here. So now I need to aim that. Okay, we are going to get there. Oh, that's so nice. All right. Let's try pin, right? Add spotlight, just spotlight, add spotlight, great. Okay, and then we go to Aisha. We're coming to you. Add spotlight.
There we go. And you don't need to pin because that's just your view.
And then I gotta unpin.
No, that doesn't matter. That's just how you're viewing it.
Just leave it that way.
Drag it out. Or you can just maybe drag it up there. Yeah, every inch is there.
All right. Good.
Okay. So now we're to the good part of this session.
One sec, sorry, Ann. Still, hold on.
Should I hold the laptop to mute the audio?
Hold the laptop.
I can hold the laptop on my lap and mute, if you need to mute the audio, is that what you're saying?
No, we're trying to get the audio in the room.
Few minutes. I guess while y'all are sitting, you can think about at the end sharing some of your own personal journeys with Kaikhosrow and Viroja.
Yeah, you can close that.
Close that. Okay, yeah. You want them to say something to see if you should start. Freya, by the way, for Freya who's sitting in India, it is like 2 in the morning, 1:30 in the morning. So you look nice and fresh there,
I know,
Freya.
you look gorgeous, Freya.
Can you say something, Freya, then Aisha? Can you say
Yes.
something? No, we
Yes,
can't.
yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
This is plugged into a
I can hear you, but
You
I
can
don't
hear
think they
us,
can
right?
hear
But
you.
we can't hear you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is the computer plugged into a speaker?
Yeah.
No, the computer needs to be plugged into a speaker.
Why don't you introduce yourself and say a little bit about your work?
Okay, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. And good morning to some of the students who are on the call, all the way in India. My name is Freya Shroff. I run a nonprofit foundation here in Mumbai, India, and we serve students who live in the slums or on the streets and help them get through college. So many of our students here, they study in vernacular medium schools. So what that means is that they're studying in a language other than English primarily. So Hindi, Marathi, Gujarati, Urdu, Kannada, and then they're asked to compete in colleges where the primary language of instruction is English. So there's a huge gap. In addition to not knowing the language, they also don't know the basics of etiquette, how do you dress, the confidence they lack. And so we help bridge this gap. That is what I'm doing today, I guess in the second innings of my life. Prior to this, I was a businesswoman. I worked in a bank and in the hospitality industry. I lived in the United States. I studied in the United States. I moved to India in January of 2007, started as a volunteer school teacher in a municipal school, and went from there. So that's a brief, quick introduction this afternoon.
Thank you, Freya. Wonderful.
Most welcome.
Aisha, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Anne, and thank you to Kushi Navdar, Famros Patel, Zagni, and folks from Zamwi that are online today. My name is Aisha Gidiali. I'm an international policy advisor with the U.S. Forest Service. So that means I represent the U.S. government at the United Nations and at other international organizations on international environment policies. I would like to share some personal stories of Professor Irani as someone who grew up at Zagni and in New York. Obviously, I was a young child, but I always remember Professor Irani cared what kids had to say. He treated us as if we had just as much of a valid point of view than any scholar or adult in the room. And that really stayed with me. It stayed with me in the sense that education and intellectual pursuits were something to be respected and something that was cool. And I think he helped really inspire that in some of the kids that grew up in the Zagni area. In 2004, Zagni honored Professor Irani in his life and work. And actually, there was an online guest book for that event, which was 18 years ago now. And I was going through some of the entries because the internet remembers everything. And I found what I actually wrote to Professor Irani 18 years ago. So if you don't mind, I'd like to share it today. Professor Irani, you have been the intellectual tour de force that has inspired us to think and rationalize in the true Enlightenment spirit, perhaps the way Zarathustra himself wanted us to strive for perfection. In a day and age when religious fervor has its hold on the world, from Asia to the Middle East to the Midwest, it is your style of religious thought in moderation and honesty that I hope leads the way. I thank you sincerely for your lifetime of efforts and thoughts. We have listened, learned, and tried to emulate in our own lives. It is scholars like you that bring us closer to understanding the deepest part of our indescribable sacred souls. And I was thinking how 18 years later, there are so many parts of this very post 9/11 description of religious fervor that must have been in my head at the time as a returned Peace Corps volunteer from the Middle East. and what Professor Irani might think today about some of the political fervor and domestic issues we are facing in this country, and how interesting it would be to hear him pontificate about the state of the world and of our country now. But thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to discussing more in the panel.
Beautiful, Aisha. Thank you.
Hi, okay, so hi everyone. I'm Kayhan, I'm a child of Zagni. I don't know, I'm a mother of a 3-year-old son. You want me to stand? Oh, speak louder. I'm a mother of a 3-year-old son, so I'm used to speaking loudly. And I'm a theater maker. Generally, I would say my work consists of bringing people together to explore what the possibilities are when we play together, when we tell our stories, and how can we expand our notion of beloved community when we get together and imagine what's possible. Keku Uncle, Professor Irani, I called him Keku Uncle. I felt very much like a beloved uncle, a grandfather, a family member. What I remember of him, my God, I remember so much. There's so much of the way he influenced my life, but not only through his thinking and through his ideas and encouraging my own ideas, but really through the way he was with his body in space. It was very much like this. He would sit together, I would sit in his living room, he would sit in my living room, and we would talk. And he did that wherever he was, and just what, like everyone said, that he respected and really wanted to hear from everyone. He was on a human level. He was really a full human being wherever he was. He was gracious, he loved art, he loved music, he loved dressing well. He looked good everywhere he went, till the final lecture that you saw. He was an impeccable dresser. He loved beautiful things. He loved opera music. He loved going out. I would say he was an extrovert. He definitely loved being around people. He loved talking to people. And those are some of my vivid memories about how he embodied who he was. He wasn't just this person who was extremely smart and special and lived outside of community. He was in community. He built community. He listened. He got people together. That's how he lived his life. And that's some of the deepest things that are left in me through knowing him is that I felt like he helped me get dressed this morning. I was thinking about him when I was getting dressed, and he's like, no, not that, Kayhan. Try something else. He wanted more color, so I was like, red, really? And he's like, yes, wear those red pants. So he really loved life. He really was full of life and all of the aspects of his humanity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing those reflections. So I'm going to ask each of you to talk a little bit about your connection to education. Each of you has a special connection to education. And I want you to reflect a little bit on what brought you to your work and the core idea or the inspiration that informs what you do as well. And maybe we can start again with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe some of you know that actually it was Keku Uncle who in some ways brought me to my work. So I left higher education. I left college after my first year of college and decided to work and figure out like what life is about, much to my parents' disappointment. And that's where I kind of found the way, I studied theater, I studied arts when I was younger, but I felt this divide between kind of commercial arts and myself as a supreme performer and star, and the type of theater and the type of arts I wanted to do, which was really about expanding democracy and making a home and making kind of the imaginations and the creativity that we have inside, making that a reality. How do we use our creativity to make this world a world that we all can live in and thrive in? And so I left college because I was like, this is not what's being taught to me. And I found my way back to a type of participatory theater called Theater of the Oppressed that was created in Brazil. And it's a participatory theater that's not done with artists, it's done with everyday people as a way to organize our thoughts, as a way to organize us towards our visions of liberation, our visions of, kind of a future. And doing that through play and through art and through performance. And Keku Uncle was in my life at that time, and he would come to my performances and he would see me doing all the various crazy things that I did. And I remember one day when I was in his apartment, he was talking to me, and we were talking about the recent play that he had come to see and what he thought of it and other things. And he said, Kayhan, he gave me a little business card, and he said, Kayhan, I think you should call this person and talk to him. And the business card was of a professor, sociology professor at CUNY, who was part of a baccalaureate program where you can create your own major, you can create your own course of study. And he didn't say anything more. He wasn't like, you must go back to college, you must do this thing, you have to, don't make your parents cry every night. He was just like, this is a person you should speak to. And I called him, and that's what led me to go back to college. And that's what led me to deepen my path of understanding about artistic and cultural tools for building democracy, for building equitable spaces. And so it was really him who brought me back onto my educational path. And I follow in the path of a Brazilian educator named Paulo Freire, who innovated a form called popular education, which was really about what I think about is Vahumano, that the mind is the most sacred, the highest form of, the highest tool we can use to creating a reality that we all can live in, that we all can thrive in. And how do we liberate the mind from all these ways in which we've been cut up and dissected and divided as people, as individuals, and class and race and all this. And so he said education is the way, and it's through kind of getting out of this idea of banking model of education. That I'm the professor, I know everything, you know nothing, and I'll make a deposit of my mind into your mind. He's saying no, it's actually through telling our stories, is through this idea that you mentioned, Anne, about the multiple lenses that reality is made up of. All the different paths that each one of us have lived and that have led us here is different. Even if we have the same desire, even if we have the same ethnicity, even if we have the same gender, how we see life as constructed is different. And that actually is a source of richness, and that can inform how we think about the world. So anyway, so that's how I think about education in my work and how Keiko Uncle has directly affected my understanding of that.
I'll just say, I haven't seen you perform before, but I saw some of your work online, and I saw this wonderful, you were one person on stage, but you dressed with you took a sash and they took a quick sari. Yes, it was beautiful. It was absolutely, it was humorous. Everybody was coming along with you, but you could feel the two people talking, coming together in this wonderful, special way. So it's fabulous work that you're doing, absolutely fabulous work. Freya, you have an amazing journey towards education and the work that you're doing. Could you share with us a bit about what brought you to this work and what really informs and inspires the work that you do as well?
Yes, thank you so much, Anne. So actually, when I moved back to India in 2007, shortly after I moved back, my grandmom had a fall, which required her to be in and out of the hospital quite a bit. So it didn't allow me to take on a permanent job, so to speak. And I wanted to do something with my time in the gaps. And I became a volunteer teacher at a municipal school. And I would go to the school virtually every day as time would allow. And I got very close to a handful of students because I would teach anywhere there was room. I would teach in the classroom, I would sit on the floor in the hallways, and anywhere I could get in. Sometimes I taught multiple classes at the same time. And I was falling in love with these kids and their dreams. And some of them knew they had dreams. Some of them didn't know they had dreams. I only knew English. They only knew Hindi. I dressed very American culture and so I had a lot to learn. They had a lot to teach me, and it was a great exchange. And once a few of my students graduated high school, which is 10th grade over here, they weren't getting a place in a prominent college. And once we were able to secure them seats in those prominent colleges, they weren't able to compete because they didn't know the language and they couldn't assimilate with the kids. They couldn't make friends. The teachers didn't want them there. The students didn't want them there. Their self-esteem was starting to get affected. And I remember thinking to myself, if my kids are going through this, there've got to be other kids going through this. And every night it was, please show me the way, please show me the way. And I got invited to a youth event by a youth organization at one of the colleges the students were at. And essentially it was a personality contest, personality grooming for private school students from this youth organization. And it got me thinking, what if we did something like this for the municipal school students who were finishing their graduation from a municipal school, and we partnered them with youth who'd finished from a private school, but were now in college. And so we created this partnership. And, you know, I was so scared this would not succeed. And I had a very small budget, 10,000 rupees. We started with 30 youth from the private side and 50 youth from the municipal school side. And we kicked this off, and it was a resounding success. And today we have our own nonprofit organization running our own programs. We serve approximately 170 private school youth every year that come into our leadership and mentorship training program. And we serve roughly 200 students from the public school side. So we've served roughly 1,500 students so far and counting. We've also expanded internationally now. Our kids have I addressed the United Nations Commission on Status of Women, thanks to Fizana in 2012. And my students addressed the UNCSW in 2021 and 2022. Thanks to Zamwi, they also spoke at the Parliament of the World's Religions. You put my student up against any other private school students today, and you won't be able to tell the difference. And we're really proud of that. And yeah, what keeps me going are their smiles, their success stories. We have failures too. Not everything is a success. Not everyone is a success. We had a young girl in COVID that we couldn't rescue. Her parents got her married, 18 years old. There are stories like that are heartbreaking, that make it very hard to get out of bed. Many, many, many mornings, I feel extremely defeated. But then we do have the success stories like the young girl, our first young girl, who is now out of the slums and in her own apartment, 1-bedroom hall kitchen, as they say here in India. And so the success stories keep you going, and the legacies that they're going to rewrite for their generations to come.
A beautiful, incredible work. And one thing that stands out for me is when you said that you were, when you started out, that you spoke English and dressed like an American. And you said, I had so much to learn from them. You know, Kayhan references as well, that really education is mutual and back and forth, and there's so much that we need to appreciate and understand and bring cultural humility to the educational efforts. So thank you so much, Rita.
Thank you.
Aisha, you also have a wonderful special connection to education. Would you share with us a little bit about what's brought you to your educational work and also what inspired you in that work?
Thank you, Anne. So as a background, my education is in the social sciences, so international affairs, history, policy, economics. But what I wanted to talk about today was not necessarily career and work and how that education has formed what I do, but how that education impacted me on a personal level when I faced a tragedy. So one day I was walking home from work, as I did in Washington, D.C. many times, and I was on a crosswalk, on a pedestrian crosswalk, and I got struck by a car. It was a really scary experience, but I was very fortunate. The car was not speeding. There was a doctor nearby who stayed with me until the ambulance came. She helped me call my partner, who ran to the scene. I was not alone in the ER as I figured out all my injuries from a full body trauma. I was also very lucky. I had parents who dropped everything to be with me. I had family and friends, communities from Zagni and Zamwi who helped support me through a 3-month healing process, which involved a wheelchair. It involved surgery on my face. It involved not being able to chew food for a long time. All of these processes were a lot to think about and a lot to comprehend. And in the beginning, it was very much of, why did this happen to me? Why did this driver not yield at a crosswalk? Was this my fault? Was this their fault? How do I stay positive when I'm not leaving my house for 3 months? A very good preparation for COVID, by the way. All of these difficulties could lead someone into a spiral negative downward. And that was something that I didn't want to happen because I was so lucky. I had family and resources, not just financial resources, but I did have those, thankfully, resources. I had a sick leave policy from my employer that allowed me to keep being paid even though I was recovering on sick leave. And I had emotional resources because I had a good education. The education allowed me to not wallow too much into my personal issues and personal struggle in that moment, but to think about what is going on. Why is the US the highest traffic fatality for high-income countries in the world? Why do 1 million people get killed each year commuting just to go to work or school or a party? And I first had to educate myself and learn about all the amazing work that's been going on in the traffic safety field. Vision Zero is a worldwide campaign to help change our culture to understand that traffic fatalities are not just the cost of free movement in society, that they can be prevented and that you can commute safely. It doesn't have to be a cost that we all bear. So first, I learned to educate myself on what was going on, using all the tools that I learned in social science that I applied to the environment world at work, but applying them to my own city where I lived, Washington, DC. Washington, DC is known as a progressive city, but last year we had more pedestrians die in our streets than in the last 15 years. So the pandemic and reduced traffic didn't help when it came to traffic fatalities. So I learned to take that education, but also to transform it into advocacy. And I think about how Professor Irani inspired us with philosophy and learning to think a little bit outside of ourselves, think about the bigger picture. And that process helped me heal. It made me less scared to get back into moving around as a pedestrian, to get back into cars, to learn how to be a productive advocate on this issue is something that I think that education helped inspire and make the below less difficult. The resilience comes from having an education, so you can handle when these storms happen. In the last 4 years since my crash, I have met a lot of other traffic victims in DC, and many of them don't have those resources. They don't have education in the same levels. They don't have family or friends that are able to support them or sick leave to get through their illnesses safely. And so that why me turned into why not me? Why not? I was lucky enough to survive. I was lucky enough to heal from my surgeries. I'm walking everywhere again. I have family, parents, and friends that supported me. So why not me to have this happen to you and to help try and have it not happen to someone else?
Aisha, thank you so much for the advocacy and the education that you're bringing to others to understand this challenge and ways we can improve as well. I think that's the other part of the educational mission, is that you're educating hundreds of people about how to be safer and how, whether you're drivers or pedestrians. So thank you for that important work. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry about the accident. We're so grateful that you are recovered and that you're leading this charge as well now. Thank you. I'd like to ask each of you to talk a little bit about this quote that I lifted up at the end of my talk by Professor Irani. He was talking about the meaning of Asha, and he said, the notion of social justice, no one prospers at the cost of somebody's injury. You all are working in moving mountains in the area of social justice, and trying to move mountains and working every day to do this. As Freya said, some days it's really hard to keep going. It's really tough. But you're all working in this field. I wonder if you could reflect on your understanding of social justice. Does it resonate with this quote by Professor Irani? What is it? Where does social justice, the meaning of it, fit into what you're doing, and how does it relate to this path of Asha? Take any part of that you'd like. Maybe Freya, we can start with you this time.
Yeah, sure. I'm looking at the quote here, and I think a chunk of the first set of education, or the first level of education we need to provide, is how we all don't prosper if even one is injured, or even if one is lacking. I think there's a huge disconnect in the population at large understanding that. Whether we look at COVID and how it was handled in different countries by the citizens, I'm not talking on a political level, anything at the moment. I think the first thing we need to understand is one person is in pain is everybody in pain. And when we grasp that concept, it becomes easier to step in to bridge that gap. At least this is how I feel. I also think living here in India, a lot of what has happened is people become numb to the level of pain that they see. India today has dropped in the poverty index just since October 2022. We have dropped in the global hunger index since October 2022. What this means is our country has become poorer and our country has become hungrier in just the span of 2 years. We've also become less educated because we weren't able to step up and meet the online education deliverables that a majority of our students needed. We didn't cover their network needs. They didn't have money for phones. They didn't have money for food. How could they get money for phones? So, and the fact that there was a huge feeling or sentiment that it was the poor that brought this disease in and was causing the gap just showed that we weren't working with the reality of the situation. They weren't the ones that got on a plane and left. That's just COVID, right? Then there's so many other elements as well. So when we educate all, we get a better pool of doctors, we get a better pool of researchers, we get a better pool of engineers, we get better roads, we get less pollution, we get better sanitation, more water. I mean, it's a no-brainer to me. And what I don't understand is how is everybody not understanding this?
Thank you so much, Freya. Thank you. Oh, Aisha, okay, sure. I was gonna sit up a little bit, but yeah, it's okay. Aisha, where do you stand on this with the quote by Professor Irani that the notion of social justice, no one prospers at the cost of somebody's injury? How does that resonate with you and the path of Asha?
Yeah, hearing that quote and actually hearing what Freya said made me think about, I mentioned how, the US has the highest traffic fatality rate of high-income countries, but of middle and low-income countries, India is one of the worst when it comes to traffic fatalities. Our own small community this year in September lost a very high-profile leader, Mr. Cyrus Mistry, the former chairman of Tata Group. You don't get more high-profile, well-educated and important than that in our small community. And this is a tragedy that him and the other passengers in the car lost their lives in a traffic crash. That being said, this issue affects everyone from every background. And in Washington, D.C., wards 7 and 8, and for those of you who don't know, that tends to be predominantly African-American and lower income areas of the city, have vastly higher traffic fatality rates than any other part of the city. So even in a city of 700,000 people, the majority of people dying on our streets are the ones that live in lower income areas. So there is something systemic happening. Why is that? What is going on with infrastructure design? Where's their funding for infrastructure design? Where's their political will? Even if you have the resources, if you don't have the political will, it's hard to make change. It's slow moving. It's, sometimes I think of my job as, if you watch C-SPAN all day, it is a little bit dry at times, but then there are moments of drama. And sometimes you only see the drama on the evening news, but you have to sit through the whole 10 hours to make that point. And so their social justice is painstakingly slow. And I think for those who are not the privileged folks, it's unfair how slow it is. And I feel for that. But it does, that quote does resonate to me. And I think it resonates when it comes to traffic fatalities. We have the high profile cases that are heartbreaking and they raise awareness on the issue. And that I think is important, that you take those high profile cases and tragedies to implement seatbelt laws, to talk about no turns on red lights, raised crosswalks for pedestrians, better connected, protected bike lanes for cyclists. All of those infrastructure designs make streets safer. It's not an unknown. It's a question of will.
And you're starting to see those infrastructure changes a lot now. I know just the other day driving through DC, noticing more and more bike lanes, more and more, no turn on red, all of that. So it's having some impact, but you're right, it's slow, sloppy. So thank you so much, Aisha.
I'm going to jump off of what Aisha said, is that it is slow, it's time consuming, and it's easier said than done, of course. How do we put our ideas into action is really, really challenging when we have had centuries of entrenched ideas that some people are throwaway people. Some people based on their life or their class are disposable and their lives don't matter. And this is inside me, it's inside each and every one of us, no matter how we try and think the best thoughts and all of that. It's ingrained in the way we've been raised, the things we've seen, and the ways in which we see other people are treated. And so I'll take, I guess, what Kaikhosrow taught me the most is that you have to live all of these contradictions, and it's never going to be, there's not going to be a perfect answer. There's not going to be a magic bullet that suddenly makes all the entrenched issues unravel and fall away. Is that you do the best that you can in the moment that you can. And I remember one example he told me, and again, he would talk to me. He wasn't trying to teach me lessons or tell me examples. He was just talking to me about life, and he was talking to me about a kind of drama that he would love to talk about, the drama inside his philosophy department and like who said what, who's doing what. And there was a point in which he had, I guess, a younger professor who he wanted to elevate in the department, and there was another person who had also a different professor they wanted to elevate. And it was kind of well known that that other professor wasn't up to par and shouldn't be elevated. Yet that guy had a vote in his guy's kind of elevation committee, and he had a vote in his. And he said outright, I won't vote for yours if you don't vote for mine. And Kaikhosrow said, what do I do in that moment? I could, yes, of course, morally, I could say, that that's wrong, and this is, people don't agree with that. Yet at the end of the day, if I do that, who is it going to harm? It's going to harm this younger professor whose career is just starting, meaning the guy he was wanting to elevate. If I choose to fight and do all of this, my role is limited. This is our role as professors in this department, in this institution. These are kind of the ways it's set up. And I'm not going to change that by arguing right now. And so he made the vote, he made the agreement, I'll vote for your guy, and you vote for mine, so that the greater good is done. The greater good being that this young professor who is starting his career is not held back because he has a grudge with someone else over definition of who should get ahead. And that's kind of yucky, right? Yet it's reality, and it's the reality we have to contend with, that it's not going to be, this is the better path, and now everyone sees the light, it's so easy to walk that path, that it's mucky, and you walk that path and you don't feel great about it sometimes, because you have to make compromises and you have to work with others, but each moment you're thinking about what's the greater good in this moment. You're thinking about the larger greater good, and then you're also thinking about what's this moment going to bring me. And so that's what I always think about, because Asha and the path of truth as a dynamic, as a relationship, is not about giving kind of messages on high, you must do this, you must do that. It's about the relationship between multiple moving parts. And how do we understand how this thing is moving so that each moment we can make a new decision, that we don't get entrenched in, I made this decision once and so that's the way it has to be for all time. It's that it's moving. I'm always thinking it's a dynamic of change. It comes alive in relationship. It doesn't come alive isolated in the bubble of abstract thought. It's so beautiful said. It's really powerful. It's really powerful. And you had used that term in one of our earlier conversations about embodying contradictions, and that's really the essence of it, isn't it? The difference between the ideal and the material world, and how you navigate it. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to ask each of you to just share a last thought. Anything you want to share, something about Professor Irani, or something about this conversation today, or just a message to the community. Aisha, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, first, perhaps the message to the community is just a thank you. I know a lot of people in the room in New York and online have been so supportive, whether it be through emails or through messages over the last 4 years. So I just want to say thank you for that. But for thinking about Professor Irani and the topic, I think he was mentioned by in the start of the discussion about Professor Irani's humor. And his intelligence, we all know and we've discussed, but his sense of humor was also great. And humor is such an important part, I think, of resilience. And after the last few years the world has experienced in the pandemic, you really see how important it is to have resilience, and humor and education are one of the ways it helps to get through these really difficult moments when your health is failing you, when society is failing you. You have to draw on your own reserves. And where do you get those reserves? And I think education, intellectual pursuits, but humor are ways to fill up that emotional bank so that you can get through difficult periods and then make it to the other side. And that, to me, is something I will always think of with Professor Irani, that no matter how smart you are, there's always a joke to be made. There's always humor in even really difficult situations.
Thank you, Aisha. Prayas?
Well, I didn't know Professor Irani, as you know, but I got to know Mr. Patel very well through this process of presenting. And his grace, his politeness, his respect, his professionalism, that is any indication of what Professor Irani was like, then I think I have a feel for what he was like. I do want to thank Zagni, Fizana. Fizana has been an unstinting support to us and our entire family. I do want to end with this one thought, that nothing we do when we do work like this is work we do alone. We do it because there's a collective whole that buys into our vision, and because they support this vision and they work relentlessly to make that vision a reality. And if it wasn't for these powerful young people who come from affluent homes, private education, who believe in this vision and step up to volunteer and mentor their peers, there is no way we could have ever grown and done the work that we do. So in anything that we do, we need people who will support our vision. And we have been very blessed to find that in the form of I have been blessed to find that in form of mentors such as Hoshi Mehta and Hutakshi Contractor and the Dali Dasu, countless Fizana family members. We as an organization have found support in donors and volunteers, adult donors and volunteers, and of course this brilliant youth team. So if you do want to step out there and you have this brilliant vision and you want to do something, do it. As soon as you step out there, you will find your people, and you together will find the strength and get over the moments of defeat. So I encourage you to step out in whatever way you can.
Thank you. It's awful to do it. Fantastic.
Okay. Similarly, I just want to thank community for being who you are, for being here, for holding it down, participating for the last number of decades to create this diverse community of thought, of people, this beautiful space. Everyone online and all the communities across North America and across the world. I want to thank the young people for coming, for taking an interest in your identity and your heritage, in wanting to root in your traditions and understand yourselves. It's our future. And so it's like I'm getting very emotional because my son will soon be coming. And this 90-year-old man was putting that seed in me when I was 20 and 30 and all. And so this notion of community that's always there, no matter how you come out of the community and come back in. I just want to thank everyone for being a part of it for as long as you have, to whatever length and extent that you have. It's because of you that I'm here, so thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Freya. I'm going to look over to Kirsty now. Do we take questions or?
A big round of applause again for these amazing. And I said before, we were proud to have Professor Irani here in our midst, but looking at these young faces, we can tell that it takes a village to raise our children, and when they are brought up with so much love and community members pulling in, the end product. So thank you, Aisha, thank you, Freya. We haven't had the chance to meet you in person. I haven't had the chance, but what you are doing is so inspiring. Imagine going to India, not knowing a word of Hindi, and doing what she does. Mind-boggling, totally mind-boggling. All right, folks. So we're going to take some questions from our audience here as well as from the chat. Does someone want to, okay, let's first take a look around the room. If anybody here wants to share their vision. Okay, Lovely, I'm going to bring you a microphone.
I got a microphone. I just want to share how I met Professor Irani.
Yeah,
He was giving a lecture under Zaki had arranged a lecture about Zoroastrianism, and I don't even remember where it was. It wasn't, of course, we didn't have a home at that time. It was at some place, midtown or somewhere. And I gave him a ride. One of the first rides that I gave him. Since then, God knows how many times. And it's not one way. The ride with him was always, I learned something. Every time we rode, Nehru and I gave him a ride, I learned something. I'm sure Nehru learned something about it. And it was a two-way street. The ride wasn't just one way. But anyway, the first time, and we are coming back. He was commenting on the Gathas. He said something about there are no Yazatas in the Gathas. And I said, no, you're wrong. I said, there are two of them. Fire is one of them, and the other one is now I forget, but anyway, there are actually two of them are mentioned in the Gathas. Maybe it will come back to me later on. And he said, yeah, you're right. I think since then, he had some kind of a respect for me. I was not just an official from Zagni who was doing the needful, and since then we have, he had some respect for me, which I benefited from. And I learned a lot from him, and we became really good friends over the years because simply it was such a pleasure, like everybody else knows, just talking to him and learning from him. Right?
Absolutely. Thank you, Loveji. And I know Aisha, you mentioned about his sense of humor, but also his humility. His humility was just, and as you said, just, oh yeah, I could tell that from us.
Lovely. You're very modest. Kaikhosrow started speaking to the Zoroastrian community during your reign as the second president of Zagni. I forgot that. But I think I have very good memory at the age of 91. And you were the one who brought Kaikhosrow to the Zoroastrian world. And I'm not wrong on that. And those who I always knew Hiroja because she was related to us. But I met Kaikhosrow Irani for the first time, and you want to know where? At Dungarwadi. My kaki's mother had passed away, and there were about 200 plus people, and Piroja took me to Kaikhosrow. Here is Freddie, you want to see? And I said, Kaikhosrow, I'm getting the visa next week. And Kaikhosrow had such a look on his face, and he was thinking, kid, probably it took me 25 years to get a green card, and you are telling me that you are getting the visa next week. I got the visa. I went to Kaikhosrow, hardly quarter mile from the embassy. And I was so excited that I'm going to America. And I was going home to Perez, and I left the visa in a cab. And cab got away, but while talking, Sadaji told me that he is from one of the suburbs where the taxi cab. So I told my friend Ramesh Jadhav, who was our peon in Union Carbide, Ramesh, we have to go to that union and find out where the visa is. Before Ramesh could go there, Arneti called me at Union Carbide and said, we got the envelope. And that's a time they refused to take any money from Arneti. He said, no, I knew what it was. Let that man move to America. And that was my experience with Kaikhosrow. And there is one thing Kaikhosrow always said, you do what is right, but it is more important to do what is morally right. And that is what we need now. We need to do what is morally right and not only legally right. I miss Kaikhosrow very much. I have gained tremendously from his experience. And as far as my children were concerned, that was the only family we knew. And my little girl used to take all kinds of liberty with Kaikhosrow and get away with murder. Same thing with Piroja. In the Gata book, he refers to me as my friend. That phrase explains me his humility. He was so humble, and sense of humor that everybody says is true. I miss my mentor, I miss my friend. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. I'm going to quickly.
In keeping with the sense of humor, if you are here today and say, what is all this nonsense going on? And everybody would say, it's Kaikhosrow, what is all this nonsense? Stop it. That's what you.
Yeah, one of his terms I remember, humbug. So just don't worry about all that crap that people say. Do what you feel like. Hi, everyone. This has been so inspiring. It's so nice to see Aisha and Priyad, old friends. This is Tina. And of course, always a pleasure, and as well. Priyad, I'm so proud of you, and I'm so proud of the work that you're doing. And I think, education is definitely the great equalizer. I'm just wondering, have you thought about amplifying your work, and have you come up with models to sort of increase it, and what can we do to support you?
Thank you so much. Right now, in terms of funding, we're not eligible to accept foreign funding yet. We have put in an application for the same, and we expect it hopefully in the next 12 to 15 months. So in terms of funding, there's nothing we can do with the USA or any other country, but donations in Indian rupees are always welcome. In addition to that, we have started a new program called Dosti. It's a mentorship program where we take international volunteers and we partner them with our students. So it's a one-to-one relationship, 1 hour a week, conversational English, any conversation you want to have that's good, clean, and happy, and practices English and grammar and confidence building with our kids. We have a volunteer form that you need to complete, and we will match you within 24 hours of receiving that volunteer form. That's where we can go from here at the present moment, given our funding restrictions. Would that help you?
Yes.
Did she say yes?
She said yes. She said
Okay, cool.
good, good.
I'm gonna link it in the Zoom chat. I'm not sure how else to get it to you, but I'm gonna link it in the Zoom chat, and hopefully an organizer can get you the link to the volunteer form.
Absolutely, we will. Thank you. There are just so many thanks coming down here in the chat. Lovely session to get us all thinking about Professor Irani. He did have a way with words. Maybe I could not hear Anne. Okay, so Anne, folks are telling me that there are some parts which they missed. We will try and get them a script. We've recorded the session, and we will get a recording to them. All right, all these young and beautiful ladies are excellent in what they're doing. Bravo. So there are so many great messages coming down here. All right, we have a question from Natalie.
Thank you. I have a question for the panelists and the moderator. What would you say is the difference between social justice and justice? Are there any reflections on that? Thank you.
So I'll just repeat. Natalie would like to ask, what is the difference between social justice versus justice? And do you want to go ahead and we can have others weigh in as well?
I think
Let me just get this.
a lot of our focus in the last couple of years has been on the concept of social justice and on looking for greater equity and justice among ourselves, across groups. I think social justice is justice myself. I think the term justice has been used oftentimes in the criminal justice sense, or thinking about justice in the court system or the legal system. Social justice maybe perhaps focuses more on our interactions, our communities, our daily work together, the institutions, correcting for mistakes that are institutional, looking at questions, for example, like with critical race theory really is focused on the institutional impact of racism, for example. So it may be that we could think about social justice as more institutional and social and less about the overall criminal justice system, for example. But that's just my very rough take on it. I'm sure the other three have something more insightful to say.
Thanks, Natalie. I think it's similar to what Kaikhosrow would say about Asha, that it's not just about the truth of the statement, or just it's not the righteousness of this law or that law, but it's a relational dynamic between all the elements that humans can control in a society. Humans make up multiple institutions in a society, not just the legal system, the educational system, the economic system, X, Y, and Z systems, where we all can act in. And if those systems are in right relationship to each other so that all life can thrive, all humans and non-human life has a chance to reach its full potential. Our rivers and our lakes and our air is not polluted to the point where it degrades into something else, that it's not breathable anymore. The way in which someone is raised with so many barriers in their way that they actually are deformed in the way that they can go about their lives, the opportunities that they have. So I think of it as this relational system, as Professor Irani related to Asha, it's that it's not one thing or another, it's the way in which all these things work together. And that's what makes it so much more complex, so much more murky in some ways. So people can use the phrase and you're like, I don't even know what you mean, because it's just a vague wash over things. But that's my personal view.
Anyone wants to jump in? I know down here in this room, Freya's and everyone, we can smell lunch. Lunch has been delayed for about half an hour. So I'm sorry, we're going to have to just some brief, answers if you have, Freya and Aisha?
You're muted, my dear.
I share muted.
Oh, I was just going to say that it's Anne and Kayhan so eloquently answer that question. I have nothing to say to come between you and lunch.
I agree with Aish. Go for lunch. What's for lunch? At least we can dream about it a little bit over here.
We have Chef Jagir Mehta who's got a surprise for us. I don't know at least, but I tell you, whatever it is smelling amazing. Thank you, thank you. So again, on behalf of everyone on the Zoom room and everyone sitting here, I really wanted to thank our keynote speaker and our panelists. Rose, would you please come up and do us the honor of giving our folks a small token of our appreciation? And Prayas and Aisha, we figure out how to get this to you. Okay, Rose, this is for Anne. Okay, so Rose wants me, Prayas, before you go to answer a question, where do you live? And he says your answer is going to be very surprising. Rose, say what do you think? Basti. So you live in the Basti. What is your address? Where do you live? It's in the Basti. Basti meaning in the slums,
Not the high riser.
Right. Not the high rises, but they're down there.
Along with your students.
No. I don't live in a basti.
All right. Okay.
I work with students in the basti, but I don't live in the basti. Etlu courage aji ayu nathi mana. But I definitely go to the bastis. I sit with my kids, I eat with the kids, but I don't live there. The goal is to get everybody out of the basti. So I'm definitely not adding one into the basti.
Metaphorically, he says that you are right there with them.
Yes, thank you again. Thank
You're
you.
most welcome.
Thank you for accepting our invitation.
This is for Anne. Anne, if you can. Just a tiny token of our appreciation, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wait, Rose.
I'm sorry.
1 second. And our dear Kaikhosrow. Can we do a quick promo? Come by your Keku's photograph and our panelists, if you can just stay here and take a picture with Keku.
I always get to stand near the tallest person. Thank you.
Thank you again, everybody. And Aisha and Prayas, we cannot thank you enough. Thank you, everyone on Zoom. Have a wonderful afternoon and a great week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone here.